Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's June 26, 2023. I've been outside this morning working in the Central Garden plot. So in the recent garden update, I talked about, taking and starting to put the weed mats and drip tapes down for the various plants. And so this area here I've talked about in the past about potentially growing doing our hardwood cuttings, doing our native permaculture nursery here, propagating more of our plants for sale in these beds here. We'll probably take some pumpkin and squash seeds that haven't really grown in a couple years, but we still got the seeds down in the root cellar. We'll probably stick some in here and see. It's late in the season to start them, but what the heck. And last spring, I talked about how I narrowed this garden. I took the pergola out last fall, took one of the big garden beds out, and narrowed beds down and shortened the lengths of them over here. So I widened out the road, the access road going back and forth. And today I decided, because I actually started putting the weed mats over in this area here, but I had this area that we grew the blue potatoes in last year. They're actually starting to shoot up there again. But I've decided, that's a real short bed, a lot of good soil there. I'm going to take that out to the compost pile and reuse that. So I'm going to use the Hulk over there, and we're going to go ahead and get this soil out and then decide how we're going to dress up the margins here on the garden here so that we don't have to deal with weeds and issues throughout the year. Then eventually I got to get over to the western garden plot and get that stuff done there. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to use the Hulk, recapture this soil here. I already turned the compost pile out back this morning, and so I'm going to go get this out there at this point. Okay, well, with the Hulk's help over there, we went ahead and removed a lot of the one big bed that was here. It was short but pretty thick, pretty high. Got several bucket loads for out back, and I still have to dress things up here, and I have to shorten this weed mat because this one had been hit by the lawnmower one time, so it got damaged. And one of the things I've talked about in the past is using, do I have one right over here? Well, here's a galvanized weed mat staple here. So this is a galvanized one, and I've been using them out here, all the new ones. These ones are galvanized or aluminized, anything that doesn't rust. And the reason for that is when they rust, they really damage, they build up big chunks of rust and soil on the base of these. And when you go to pull the weed mats, which need to be adjusted or pulled back for harvesting each year, it does less of the fraying of the weed mat, and it decreases the size of the holes which seeds can germinate through, and you can have weeds coming up in your weed mat. So here's an example of an old hole that was started by a staple going through here, and then a weed got right up around the staple as it began to rust and all. And so I'd say one thing is always use rust-resistant staples in your weed fabric. There's less of a chance of damaging the weed fabric. You get many more years out of it. This weed fabric here, some of it is probably 10 years old because I keep reusing it over and over again. And some of it's probably only 4 or 5 years old. We'd have to go back and look at the videos to see when I put some new ones in. But the weed fabric, if you're using the DeWitt or 5-layer woven weed fabric, it really works out great. And I'll put a link in the description below for those on Amazon. You can find it any place, the DeWitt weed mats. That was the cheapest place for us to pick it up. I'll also put a link to the galvanized staples, which have been really, really good. They slip in and out, they hold really well. In our high wind zone, we have to put in more staples than most people. But I'll also put in a link for this WorkPro bolt cutter, a really small bolt cutter. So what I do when I'm pulling out the old rusted ones, instead of pulling them through, I actually will go ahead, and I'll show you here, this is one of the newer ones, but I'll go ahead and cut it right here, and instead of pulling all of the rust, pulling all of that rust through, hopefully this is showing up, when I cut it off here, the part that doesn't have much rust on it, I can back this out from underneath, and it works really well. Now, I used to use tin snips and angle cutters and all of those sorts of things, and some of my wiring tools, they just weren't as good. But these WorkPro bolt cutters here work out really well, and even Thea can one-handed go ahead and cut the bolts with relative ease and all. At least this gauge that they are. So I've still got to decide. I've got to use the leaf blower to get a lot of the soil off the surface of the mats after getting them uncovered from the center there, because we don't want the soil on the surface of the weed mats, because the seeds will get deposited there and start growing, and then they can set the roots down between the woven fabric. So I got to clean off the weed mats with the leaf blower. That's twice a year thing I've got to do. The other thing is, what else do I have to do? Then I have to decide how I'm going to end this margin here and how I'm going to do my ends. Am I going to try and do like clover around the spots and keep it nice and neat, or am I going to put weed mat down on top of all this? And the same thing at the other end, and how am I going to end this margin here and then put the T-posts in for keeping this somewhat protected from the wildlife as things start growing in here. So just wanted to show you we're modifying this garden again, removing that one spot, and then as I thought about it, the staples, using the right staples, a good weed fabric. You don't want soil on top of your weed fabric. Some people put soil or mulch on top of the weed fabric. That's just inviting problems. Roots of plants will work the ways down into the weed fabric. And I'd say get the multi-layer weed fabric. It's going to last for years. Definitely get galvanized staples, and if you got rusty staples, get the bolt cutters as well. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find it of value. If you have any tips or hints, please leave them in the description below because we can all benefit from additional information. Thanks so much for watching and have a super fantastic day. Bye-bye now.